This is a video guide for the Gemling Legionnaire I've been playing in Path of Exile 2 patch 0.5. It revolves around Flameblast, which can do pretty ridiculous damage on the Gemling Legionnaire Ascendancy. I'm now at a point where one Flameblast does several times the max life of any boss in the game, including pinnacle bosses. With Path of Exile builds, I normally do more of a showcase video than an actual guide, but since sharing this build on Reddit a few days ago, I've had a number of people say they'd like more of a guide, so this video will be slow. I'll try my best to be thorough, explaining my choices while also offering cheaper alternatives and recommending what to prioritize in the progression. I'll include a path of building link in the video description for what my character looks like as of the making of this video. If you're like me and would rather study that than listen to someone yap, just click that link. The core concept of the build is fairly simple. Gemling Legionnaire has a notable passive called Advanced Thaumaturgy that unlocks a second quality bonus for every gem in the game. Some of them are pretty inconsequential, while some are utterly build-defining. Flameblast's second quality bonus gives it 2% more magnitude of damaging ailments per stage, per 1% quality. Flameblast can be channeled to 10 stages, and my Flameblast has 48% quality, so at full channel it deals 960% more ailment damage. If you're thinking, that seems really overpowered, you're right. It is overpowered. Why should gem quality make a skill do over 10 times as much damage? Did the devs miss a zero? Who knows? They actually did nerf some of the outlying Gemling quality bonuses, including that of Flameblast, by accident in patch 0.5.2 by pushing some nerfs that I assume were meant for the next league. The nerfs were quickly reverted in a hotfix that same day, but at least we know now that Flameblast Gemling is on the nerf list for next league, so enjoy it while it lasts. My variant of the build uses the new Kalguran gem Frostflame Nova. Frostflame Nova looks a lot like Ice Nova, but does no damage with its initial wave. However, if the wave touches an enemy that's ignited, it refreshes the duration of the ignite and applies an effect to the enemy called Volatile Ice. Volatile Ice prevents new ignites from being applied until the existing ignite expires, but for the duration of the existing ignite, Volatile Ice periodically hits the enemy with cold damage. That cold damage has a multiplier to freeze buildup that scales with the magnitude of the ignite on the enemy, relative to its ailment threshold. In addition to being able to freeze any boss quickly, this also doubles my ignite damage thanks to the unique staff Taryn's Shiver, which causes enemies frozen by me to take 100% increased damage. Given the obvious single target potential of the build, the hardest problem to solve was how to actually clear maps. Flameblast has a base cooldown of 10 seconds, so I needed to either add another skill to use while it was cooling down, or speed up Flameblast's cooldown enough to make it comfortable to use on its own. I went through many iterations of the build, but eventually ended up on this. The build uses the Blackflame Covenant keystone, which converts fire damage from fire spells to chaos damage, causes chaos damage from fire spells to contribute to ignite, and makes ignite from fire spells do chaos damage over time. It also turns fire spells and their ignites purple, which looks cool. The practical advantage that Blackflame Covenant has for this build is that I can use Contagion to spread ignites around. Contagion applies a chaos damage over time debuff to a handful of enemies, and when they die, they spread Contagion and any other chaos dots to all nearby enemies. Since Blackflame Covenant turns my ignites into chaos dots, they can now be spread via Contagion. This sometimes leads to very satisfying flame blasts where things immediately die several screens away because the ignite chained across something like an abyss or a breach. In addition to spreading ignites via Contagion, I also have this modifier on my Loreweave, which causes ignited enemies to spread that ignite to enemies that are nearby for at least 1 second. That applies a new ignite with full duration. Notably, this effect also spreads ignite from burning corpses. That means I can ignite an enemy, and if another enemy walks over their corpse, or simply spawns on top of it, that enemy will be inflicted with a brand new ignite of the same magnitude. This makes encounters that spawn enemies in a small area really easy for this build. Most ritual encounters, for example, are just me standing there while enemies get spawn killed and refresh the ignite. The combination of these two forms of ignite proliferation results in gameplay that feels more like I'm trying to paint the map with a flaming paintbrush than actually hit most of the enemies directly. Once I've got a few burning bodies, I can often just walk around and press Contagion to set other stuff ablaze, continuing to get mileage out of older ignite applications. This doesn't completely mitigate the problem of Flameblast not being usable all the time because of its cooldown. When Flameblast is on cooldown, I use Incinerate, a channeling spell that applies a compounding ignite to enemies. Incinerate costs no mana, but consumes fuel gained by spending mana on other skills. Flameblast has a pretty absurd mana cost at high gem levels, so it's pretty easy to charge Incinerate with it. Incinerate does only a tiny fraction of Flameblast's damage, but in most scenarios it can clear just fine when paired with my ignite spreading mechanics. In maps with high deliriousness levels, Incinerate definitely starts to struggle to kill things, so in that content I'm more reliant on Flameblast for clear. I should also note that because this build's clearing ability relies partially on spreading ignite from burning bodies, It doesn't like effects that destroy all corpses. Gloom Shrines, ironically, make clear speed worse. When I notice I've clicked on a Gloom Shrine, I make sure to right-click the buff icon on top of the screen to remove the shrine buff. There are other options for clearing while Flameblast is on cooldown. Theoretically, anything that applies a Chaos Dot would work. With Blackflame Covenant, that includes any fire spell and anything that applies poison. A relatively popular choice is Essence Drain, a Chaos Projectile spell that applies a non-ailment Chaos Dot. Of the options I've tried, I like Incinerate the most, but feel free to tinker if you're trying this build yourself. You may also consider socketing Adziri's Impatience into Flameblast, which significantly speeds up its cooldown but makes you lose 25% of life and mana when you start channeling it. This may enable just using Flameblast and Contagion to clear. I tried this, but didn't like it. Defensively, I'm pleasantly surprised with how this character turned out. My strongest defensive layer is my Blasphemy Triple Curse setup. I run Temporal Chains and Enfeeble with heavy investment into Curse Magnitude and Area of Effect. This slows every enemy on screen to a crawl and makes it do a lot less damage. That damage debuff works really well with armor because armor is more effective against smaller hits. Also, Temporal Chains causes other effects to expire more slowly on enemies, making bosses remain ignited and frozen for longer. I have over 20,000 armor against physical damage, over 30,000 armor against elemental damage, and nearly 4,000 armor against chaos damage. This is in large part due to Arctic Armor, another skill that disproportionately benefits from the Gemling's quality bonuses. At maximum stages, my Arctic Armor is giving me 384% increased armor. I only lose stages on Arctic Armor when I'm hit by melee attacks, so I'm pretty much always at or near maximum stages. I'm also immune to crits thanks to one of the bonuses I'm receiving from the Gemling notable Gem-Studded. Curses have 80% reduced effect on me, which makes some map mods largely negligible. I have 80% of every resistance, including Chaos. On top of that, I take 46% of damage from mana before life, and have about 4,300 combined life and mana. Lastly, as a more active defense, I use the Kalguran Gem Refutation, which causes me to block most types of hits for a duration when used. It's a button I press when I want to make sure I can safely channel a Flameblast in dicey situations. Despite 4,000 HP not being an extraordinary amount, all of these defensive layers make the build feel safe, even in juiced 200% delirious maps. I've been playing this character for a while now. He's currently level 97. As such, my gear is pretty optimized, with all of the obvious upgrades being pretty expensive. Altogether, I've probably invested more than 300 divines into this build. You can absolutely play this build on a fraction of that, which I'll get into later. For now, I'm going to go over the gear that I have on right now, starting with my gems. This is my full gem setup. I'll spend a few minutes now going over all the important skills and their support gems, but if you just want the full overview, here it is. You may notice a lot of random support gems that don't make sense. This is because I'm trying to have an equal number of red, green, and blue support gems so that I can get all 3 bonuses from the Gem-Studded Ascendancy passive. The build uses a lot of blue support gems, so it needs a lot of red and green ones to balance things out. If you're playing this build, make sure you always double-check your support gem counters at the top of the skill screen whenever you make a change to your gem setup. Flameblast is the first gem you'll want to get 5 sockets on. These are my current support gems. Verana's Siege gives the skill more AoE and boss damage. Zoph's Pyre adds 40% of damage as extra chaos. Scouring Flame is a Kalguran gem that increases ignite magnitude and turns ignites blue, but adds a runic ward cost to the skill. Scouring Flame is better than Searing Flame too, because it does more ignite damage, 150% versus 140%, without also lowering the hit damage and therefore the ignite chance. Ignite 3 triples ignite chance while speeding up the ignite a bit. Eternal Flame 2 massively increases ignite duration, which enables a lot of the clear and single target shenanigans this build is capable of. Verana's Siege and Zoph's Pyre can easily be replaced with other support gems that do comparable damage without costing a bunch of divines, such as Considered Casting and Controlled Destruction. The Flameblast gem itself is twice corrupted to level 21 and 23% quality. The double corruption is definitely a luxury upgrade. It's worth eventually doing because of how well Flameblast scales with quality, but I'd put this pretty low on the priority list, which I'll get into later in the video. Frostflame Nova is the only skill gem I have set to only use with my second weapon set, which contains Taryn's Shiver. All of the other skills on my bar are set to my main weapon, which has a bunch of additional gem levels. Despite being strictly a utility skill, Frostflame Nova benefits greatly from being level 21 and having 5 support gems, because the freeze build-up scales with damage dealt. I'm supporting it with Freeze, Deep Freeze, Tool's Stillness, Considered Casting, and Hourglass. Hourglass gives the skill a cooldown, but it's the same 10-second cooldown that Flameblast has, and I only really use Frostflame Nova immediately after using Flameblast, so it's not much of a downside. Tool's Stillness is by far the most expensive support gem this build uses. It's a low priority upgrade given its cost, but it's the best support gem for the skill in this setup. It makes the skill gain 40% of cold damage as extra chaos damage, and allows chaos damage from hits to contribute to freeze buildup. Including from the support gem itself, my Frostflame Nova is gaining 64% of damage as extra chaos damage, and my Despair Curse lowers boss's chaos resistance by over 40%. Having all of that chaos damage contribute to freeze buildup makes a big difference in how quickly things freeze. My Incinerate, like my Flameblast, is level 21 and 23% quality. However, the extra 3% quality is pretty useless for this gem. I only have it because I hit 23% with the Valor, decided to twice corrupt it, and got lucky. Level 21, on the other hand, is worth going for. The support gems I use for Incinerate are Ignite 3, Scouring Flame, Chaos Attunement, Controlled Destruction, and Fire Mastery. My Blasphemy setup contains Temporal Chains, Enfeeble, Despair, Ritualistic Curse, and Magnified Area 2. None of these skill gems need level 20 that badly, but they all like having 20% quality. Mana Remnants is a pretty important spirit gem for this build, because it provides the bulk of my mana sustain while clearing maps. It also overflows my maximum mana, allowing it to recover to over 3,000. This helps me channel Flameblast without dipping too far into my mana pool, which I also use for HP. In my setup, I have Mana Remnants set to only weapon set 1, because my main weapon has the additional spirit I need to cast it. This is fine, because I don't need Mana Remnants active while I'm casting Frostflame Nova. The support gems I'm using for Mana Remnants include a lineage support gem called Katal's Rejuvenation. This causes the Mana Remnants to also grant temporary cooldown reduction up to 40%, which helps me use Flameblast more frequently while clearing maps. I've already talked about Arctic Armor and Refutation, so I'll skip those now. That just leaves Overwhelming Presence, the secret sauce to making freeze more consistent for the build. Overwhelming Presence lowers enemy ailment threshold, in my case by 40%. If I'm understanding things correctly, that 40% reduction is in a way double dipping on the freeze buildup from Frostflame Nova. The Frostflame Nova gem states that Volatile Ice gains a multiplier to freeze buildup based on the DPS of the Ignite relative to the enemy's ailment threshold. Lowering the enemy's ailment threshold by 40% means the Ignite is now doing more damage relative to the enemy's ailment threshold, which makes this stat on the gem 67% more powerful. Then, the freeze buildup from damage dealt is inherently based on enemy ailment threshold, which means Volatile Ice effectively gets a separate 67% more freeze buildup multiplier. I'd estimate that Overwhelming Presence is actually something like a 2.7 times multiplier to my freeze buildup. By the way, I recommend running Overwhelming Presence at a lower gem level so that it doesn't raise the build's strength requirement. I just happened to get some extra strength, so I leveled it to 19. Let's move on to my equipment, in order from most important to least. We'll start with the only truly build-enabling piece, Loreweave. Loreweave is a unique body armor that gets 3 random modifiers from a large pool of unique ring modifiers. The 2 modifiers that are essential for this build are You Can Apply an Additional Curse, and Ignites You Inflict spread to enemies that stay within 1.5 meters for 1 second. My specific Loreweave also has 18% of armor also applies to chaos damage, which is a nice defensive mod. In addition to the random unique ring mods, Loreweave also gives quality to all skills and sets maximum resistances to a specific value. My Loreweave has 5% skill quality and 80% max resists. Something interesting about Loreweave is that it sets your maximum resistances to a specific value and makes them unmodifiable otherwise. This means maximum resistances can be neither raised nor lowered by anything else. That works really well with Rune of the Prism, which gives 20% elemental resistances and minus 10% maximum elemental resistances. Because of Loreweave, we can ignore the downside and simply gain 20% elemental resistances from one rune. It also means we can ignore the Waystone modifier that lowers players' maximum resistances. The second augment I'm socketing in Loreweave is Kraken's Rune of Warding, which reduces curse effect on me by 50%. Combined with the 30% reduced curse effect from my skill tree, I get a total of 80% reduced curse effect, which is enough that I no longer care if I get cursed. In most cases, I recommend using a Great Wolf's Rune of Willpower in the second slot instead. It makes you take 15% of damage from mana before life, which with the skill tree brings you to 49% total. That's a good ratio if your life and mana values are close to one another, which mine are. The only reason I've swapped to the curse reduction rune is that I was able to get damage taken from mana before life on a ring, which may be difficult to find on a ring that otherwise has good stats. My belt is Darkness Enthroned. It drops with 2 augment sockets and comes in several variants that determine what type of equipment the sockets count as being part of. For this build, I'm using the body armor variant. which means any augments I socket into the belt gain bonuses as though the belt were body armor instead. The belt also boosts the effects of the socketed augments by 50% to 100%, depending on the role of the item. Effectively, I have 4 augment sockets in my body armor, and 2 of them are extra strong. The primary reason this belt is popular among Gemling Legionnaires is because of the Fox idol. When socketed in body armor, it causes all idols socketed in the item, including the Fox idol itself, to gain an additional bonded modifier. The Fox idol's bonded modifier grants plus 5% to quality of all skills, which gets boosted to 9% as long as Darkness Enthroned has at least an 80% roll on it. The second augment in my belt is Rune of the Blossom, which grants plus 50 to Spirit, but minus 1 to Spirit per 2 levels. Ordinarily, this would mean the Spirit bonus approaches 0 as you level up to 100. However, with 88% increased effect from Darkness Enthroned, the plus 50 Spirit becomes plus 94 Spirit, while the minus 1 to Spirit per 2 levels is unchanged. That's because the game rounds down after the multiplier, which means the minus 1 only becomes minus 2 with a perfect 100% roll on Darkness Enthroned. Therefore, a 100% roll on the belt is actually a bad thing for this build, and the best roll would be 98% or 99%, since either of those would result in plus 99 Spirit and minus 1 Spirit per 2 levels. At level 97, with an 88% roll on the belt, this single rune is giving me plus 46 Spirit. My staff is pretty good, but not amazing. I'm currently trying to craft a better one, but this is really just a vanity project and an excuse to use a Celestial alloy for the League Challenge. The build already does more than enough damage. As always in this game, the most important modifier is the plus 6 to level of all spell skills. You may also choose to go for level of fire spell skills specifically, instead of simply all spell skills. The advantage of all spell skills is that it affects secondary spells like curses. The advantage of all fire spell skills is that it can roll higher, at plus 7 instead of plus 6, resulting in roughly 16% more damage for Flameblast and Incinerate. I chose to get a staff with additional spirit so that I could fit in all the reservation skills that I wanted to. The rest of the stats on the staff are pretty standard caster item mods, minus crit suffixes, because I'm not scaling crit. Early into the build's progression, I actually recommend using a wand and scepter instead of a staff. I'll go into more detail later in the video. The augments I'm using on my staff are Hedgewitch Assandra's Rune of Wisdom for an additional skill level, and Warding Rune of Equinox for ward regeneration. Warding Rune of Equinox single-handedly provides all of the additional ward regeneration the build needs, which is actually quite a lot because Flameblast costs a lot of ward per second when supported by Scouring Flame. The Taryn's Shiver in Weapon Set 2 is socketed with a Thanimus' Rune of Agony and a Perfect Iron Rune. It's also corrupted with better rolls. Unfortunately, the stat enemies frozen by you take 100% increased damage is an unscalable value, meaning it cannot be corrupted to go above 100%. This is probably a good opportunity for me to address why the build doesn't have any way to apply the Withered debuff. Nearly every Chaos build applies Withered in some way, often with the Dark Effigy skill linked to Withering Touch. However, Withered is a lot less valuable for this build because of the 100% increased damage taken already being applied by Taryn's Shiver. All sources of increased damage taken are additive with one another, which means Withered is effectively half as potent for this build as it would be otherwise. Specifically, 50% increased damage taken from 10 Withered stacks would only be 25% more damage dealt for this build. You could argue that 25% more damage is still a lot, and that this could easily be scaled up to 35% with 3 passive points. If you're playing this build and really want that extra damage, you'll need to find an open skill slot, either by dropping 1 skill gem or by using something like an Unset Ring. I personally found the placement of totems too annoying, the mana cost of Dark Effigy too high, and the stacking of Withered too slow to be worth another skill gem and button press. Taryn's Shiver already essentially applies 20 stacks of Withered nearly instantly. The Amulet for this build should be one with a high spirit roll and ideally some additional skill levels. All Attributes is a good mod because it gives a lot of total attributes for a single suffix slot, and this build does need some of all 3 attributes. My Amulet is instilled with an enchantment that allocates the Paragon notable on the skill tree. This note is normally hidden and only obtainable via enchantments. It grants plus 5 to all attributes and plus 5% to quality of all skills. This build scales very well with skill quality, so we'll take any source we can get that's not too high of an opportunity cost. My helmet is my largest source of base armor. Loreweave's item armor is decent, but far less than what I'd want in a rare endgame body armor. I'm also not using a rare belt and have no shield, which means I need as much armor as I can get from my helmet, boots, and gloves. Given that helmets have the best base armor of those 3, I decided to go for a super high armor helmet, mine having over 1600 without an Iron Rune socketed. This works really well with the Emergent Vigor rune, which gives +1 to maximum life per 8 armor in the helmet, or in this case, plus 202 max life. Similarly, it works great with the Runic Helm notable, which grants +1 to maximum energy shield per 8 armor in the helmet. That's plus 202 max ES, which is converted to plus 202 max mana by Eldritch Battery. The suffixes are simply armor applies to elemental damage and some resistances. The boots and gloves look similar to the helmet, but with less emphasis on maximizing armor. Max life and max mana are good to get in these slots, since the armor opportunity cost is lower. Both the boots and gloves also have the armor applies to elemental modifier on them. Boots should always have movement speed, preferably at least 30%. Personally, I like having at least one life regen mod on my gear, so I've opted for boots with a life regen suffix. You may notice that my gloves are runeforged. I bought them like this, but would actually prefer that they not be runeforged. I don't really need more runic ward than what Loreweave provides. It doesn't do much for me other than raise my stun threshold during refutation. I'd prefer to just have the higher armor value, but it's a small difference either way. The rune in my gloves is Cadigan's Epiphany, which destroys all other augment sockets but adds a jewel socket to the gloves. This is a relatively expensive and low priority upgrade. For most of this character's progression, I was using a Courtesan Manon's Rune of Cruelty, which gives this build 20% increased ignite magnitude. Rings are mainly used to fill out resistances and attributes. I managed to get a ring with some curse magnitude and damage taken from mana before life, but this wasn't worth going for until I had spare suffixes to work with. Rings are also a good slot for adding life and mana, since there aren't many good ring prefixes for this build. There's not much to say about my flasks and charms. I do have this Rite of Passage, which gives me some extra tankiness while clearing, but it's not necessary at all. Many of the clips in this video were recorded before I even bought this charm. Now let's go over my passives, starting with my Ascendancy class. If you're following along, start with Essence of Virtue, mainly because it's a prerequisite for the more important nodes. Advanced Thaumaturgy and Implanted Gems should be your second and third ascensions, but the order in which you take those may depend on what skills you're using to level your character. Flameblast isn't available until level 52, so you'll need to use something else before then. I'd imagine most builds would prefer Implanted Gems first for the additional skill levels, but if your skill is one that particularly benefits from the Gemling's gem quality bonuses, maybe take Advanced Thaumaturgy first. If you're planning to transition to Flameblast Ignite immediately at level 52, take Advanced Thaumaturgy right away. Your fourth and final Ascendancy should be Gem-studded, which grants you bonuses based on which of your support gem colors are most numerous. If you can socket an equal number of each of the 3 colors, you'll get all 3 bonuses from Gem-studded. Most notably, the red bonus makes you immune to crits, which is an incredible defensive layer, especially in endgame maps where Waystones can be rolled with monster crit chance and crit bonus. I'll go over my jewels before getting into the main passive tree. My build uses 5 jewels, one of which is Prism of Belief. My copy of Prism of Belief grants Flameblast +3 to skill level. The +3 is quite expensive, so I recommend settling for +2 until you reach a point where 16% more damage is worth the price difference. I'm also running a Heart of the Well with 2% mana on kill, 13% damage as extra chaos, and 14% increased cooldown recovery rate. The cast speed is an afterthought and could be anything. A little bit of cooldown rate noticeably helps with Flameblast's long cooldown. The 13% of damage as extra chaos is just a solid damage boost, and I like having at least 2% life on kill and 2% mana on kill on every build because it makes clearing maps a lot smoother. I'm using 1 rare jewel, with Ignite Magnitude, Magnitude of Ailments, and 2% life on kill. It's crafted with a potent liquid ferocity to boost the effect of the prefixes, which are the 2 damage mods. I have a Megalomaniac that allocates 2 notables on the passive tree, Tempered Defenses and Arsonist. There are many different notables that would work well here, so if you're shopping for a Megalomaniac, keep your mind open. Mine certainly isn't best in slot or anything. Other good notables include Gem Enthusiast, Lasting Trauma, Burnout, Searing Heat, Prism Guard, Distant Dreamer, and many others that I'm sure I'm missing. When searching the market, make a list of notables you want and set the count to at least 2. Last but certainly not least, I use Split Personality, a jewel that lets you allocate nodes starting from a different character's starting point on the passive tree. Mine lets me start from the Sorceress's starting area, so that I can completely disconnect from the bottom area of the skill tree where I began. This saves a huge number of skill points, so I'd actually recommend that this jewel be the first large purchase you make for the build. Since this was my second character of the league, I bought the jewel before I even created the character. If you level the build without the jewel, that's fine, but you'll be wasting a lot of skill points until you buy one. My build is pretty spread out over the top region of the passive tree. The keystones I allocate are Blackflame Covenant, Eldritch Battery, and Whispers of Doom. Eldritch Battery converts all my energy shield to mana, but doubles mana costs. Whispers of Doom increases my curse limit by 1, but doubles curse's activation delay. That downside isn't relevant to curses applied via Blasphemy, so for this build, Whispers of Doom is all upside. On weapon set 1, I focus on Chaos damage, Ignite magnitude, and Flammability magnitude. On weapon set 2, I focus on Freeze buildup, Freeze duration, and Cold damage. My non-weapon set passives revolve around Curse magnitude, damage taken from mana before life, mana regen, and armor. I prioritized the damage nodes on the tree first, then at higher levels finished up by grabbing the curse clusters. If you're in a hardcore league, maybe grab the curse nodes sooner, since that's one of the main defensive layers. Allocate the damage taken from mana before life nodes according to your current ratio of life to mana. For instance, if you have twice as much life as mana, you'll want to take roughly 33% of damage from mana before life to maximize your effective HP. The more mana you have relative to life, the more you'll want to invest in mana before life as a stat. I'll be the first to admit I'm unqualified to give advice for optimized leveling strategies, because I never really use them. I've heard there's some fast leveling strategy involving Corrupting Cry, Tabula Rasa, and a bunch of Warcry gems. That's the extent of what I know, but maybe you can look into it further if you're interested. Whatever you decide to level with, your early skill tree will look nothing like your final tree, because you'll be starting from the bottom region as a mercenary. If you already have a split personality jewel, and your intent is to transition into a spell build as soon as possible, you'll want to take the shortest path to the sorceress's starting point, grab a jewel socket on the top side of the tree, socket in the split personality, and then disconnect from the mercenary's starting point. I leveled mostly with crossbows, using permafrost bolts and fragmentation rounds until level 52, where I transitioned to Flameblast immediately. Objectively, I probably should have just stuck to crossbows until I was at a higher level, but the early transition gave me more time to tinker with the build. I probably went through a dozen iterations of the build before I ended up here. Here's what I chose for permanent stat boosts in the campaign. If you prefer, you may choose to take resistances instead of attributes from the Halls of the Dead. I just picked attributes because it seems easier to fill out missing resistances than attributes in the endgame. The other choices are likewise low impact, but I think they're correct. I'm going to try my best here to give you a list of priorities for what to upgrade in the gear progression. It may not be perfect, because I didn't follow these rules, I just cobbled the build together as I went. The bare minimum to get the build going mechanically is to have the Ignite Proliferation and additional curse mods from Loreweave. If you're starting completely from scratch and don't have a Divine Orb or two to drop on a Loreweave, then you can instead run 2 unique rings, Crackle Creep and Doedre's Damning, which give the same 2 modifiers at the cost of both ring slots. Since you don't have much currency to spend, the rest of your gear can be cheap rares. Prioritize elemental resistances, armor also applies to elemental damage, mana, and life. Make sure to get movement speed on your boots, preferably at least 30%. Use runes to boost armor and fill out elemental resists as needed. If you're able to get some chaos resistance, even 30 to 40% will make a big difference. Having at least 1 flat life regen suffix is some solid quality of life if you can get it. If you don't need the socket in your gloves to cap a resistance, then try to get a Courtesan Manon's Rune of Cruelty, which when socketed in gloves gives this build 20% increased ignite magnitude. In order to easily get enough spirit to use all the skills, you can use a wand and scepter instead of a staff. If you can get a scepter with at least 161 spirit, then that alone gets you to 261 total spirit. With that amount, you should be able to use every spirit skill I use, provided you're able to get at least 24% quality on Blasphemy to lower its spirit reservation. If you've done your first 2 Ascendancies, you should be able to get 24% quality on Blasphemy with 4 Gemcutter's Prisms. Alternatively, a scepter with at least 174 spirit would let you fit everything in without any Gemcutter's Prisms. While we're on the topic of Gemcutter's Prisms, make sure to also put quality on your Flameblast gem, since that's kind of what the whole build revolves around. As you get more Gemcutter's Prisms, incrementally add quality to your other gems in the following order: Arctic Armor, Contagion, Temporal Chains, Enfeeble, Despair, Frostflame Nova, Incinerate, Refutation, Mana Remnants, Overwhelming Presence. The primary issue with using a wand and scepter instead of a staff is that a lot of your spirit will only be available on weapon set 1. When using a staff setup, you'll have 35 to 50 more spirit on weapon set 1 than weapon set 2. That means you can simply deactivate Mana Remnants on weapon set 2, because that skill isn't important while casting Frostflame Nova. On the other hand, with a wand and scepter, you have 160 plus spirit locked away in weapon set 1. Now you have to deactivate Blasphemy on weapon set 2, which I would prefer not to do. If you're using a wand and scepter, I recommend quickly swapping back to weapon set 1 after casting Frostflame Nova to reactivate your curses. This jank should go away after eventually transitioning to a staff. If you're starting out with enough spirit on your scepter, you won't need to worry about getting spirit on your amulet right away. If you don't need spirit on the amulet, it should be pretty cheap to get an amulet with +2 to level of all spell skills and a decent all attributes roll, along with a couple of other usable stats. To enable the gems that cost Runic Ward, you'll want to buy a Warding Rune of Equinox and socket it into your staff or scepter. Make sure to Runeforge some armor to get maximum ward to spend. If you have Loreweave, Runeforge that and that alone. Buy a Taryn's Shiver for your second weapon set. If it doesn't change the price at all, try to get one with good rolls, maybe even a corrupted one with some rolls over maximum. Socket it with 2 Iron Runes, 2 Glacial Runes, or 1 of each, whichever combination results in the highest tooltip damage for Volatile Ice. Make sure you've got a couple of jewel sockets allocated on your passive tree. Try to get 1 Recover 2% of maximum life on kill mod, and 1 Recover 2% of maximum mana on kill mod, to improve your sustain while clearing maps. These mods can spawn as suffixes on non-unique jewels. They can also appear on Heart of the Well, which can spawn with other great mods for this build, such as cooldown rate and damages extra chaos. For rare jewels, look for increased ignite magnitude and increased magnitude of ailments in the prefixes. If you have at least 15 unused spirit, you could alternatively use a Cannibalism 1 support gem to get 2% life on kill without needing it on a jewel. Let's say you've got the build going and are able to start accumulating Divine Orbs. If you haven't yet picked up Loreweave, do that as soon as possible so you can drop the unique rings for good rares. At this point, you're hopefully comfortable enough to start saving up for larger purchases. The first large purchase to go for is a split personality jewel, if you don't already have one. This should allow you to drop the 25-ish skill points you use to travel from the mercenary's starting point on the skill tree. However, don't let that big upgrade stop you from making incremental upgrades to your equipment along the way. Even just upgrading from 1 Exalt Rares to 20 Exalt Rares can make a big difference in armor and HP values, and allow you to comfortably progress into higher tier maps. Try to get the Armor also applies to elemental damage suffix on your helmet, boots, and gloves at this stage. If it's cheap to get a comparable wand with more spell damage and or more skill levels, don't hesitate. If you need Chaos Resist, know that Void Flux exists and can turn other resist mods into Chaos Resist. If you'd like to speed up your Flameblast's cooldown while clearing maps, consider grabbing a Catal's Rejuvenation support gem, and supporting Mana Remnants with it. It'll set you back a couple of Divines, but it's worth it. Once you've managed to buy a split personality jewel, there's a number of less expensive upgrades you can start picking up. The easiest one is a Prism of Belief with +2 to level of all Flameblast skills. Eventually you'll want a +3, but +2 is an order of magnitude less expensive, and gives you a very large damage boost for a single jewel socket. This is a simple upgrade that shouldn't prompt any other adjustments to the build. You just need a jewel socket available. The next multi-divine purchase to go for is probably a Darkness Enthroned, along with the accompanying Fox Idol and Rune of the Blossom. As I mentioned earlier, make sure you get a Darkness Enthroned that says body armor on it, or it won't work for this build. Look for at least an 80% roll. The higher the roll, the higher the spirit, unless you get one with a 100% roll. Don't do that. Having Darkness Enthroned means you now have more spirit to work with, so maybe now is a good time to think about upgrading your weapon and amulet. You'll want an amulet with +2 to level of all spell skills, a high spirit roll, a good all attributes roll, and hopefully some other relevant stats. You could also reach for a similar amulet with +3 to level of all spell skills, but that will almost certainly push the price into double-digit divine range. If your amulet is now good enough not to need an upgrade for a long time, now might be a good time to instill it with the Paragon enchantment at the Withered Hollow. You'll need to use Potent Liquid Ferocity, Concentrated Liquid Isolation, and Liquid Despair, in that order. It's probably not worth doing this on an amulet that's worth less than the cost to enchant it, so make sure your amulet is solid before you do this. As for the weapon upgrade, you'll need a staff with spirit on it to fully make up for the loss of spirit from the scepter. Spirit can only be obtained on staves via a desecrated prefix. If you're having trouble finding a good staff with skill level, spell damage, cast speed, and spirit, then consider looking for a non-desecrated one without spirit but with an open prefix for desecration. Depending on current prices, it may be cheaper on average to hit the spirit desecration yourself. If you do, make sure you use an Omen of the Liege to improve your odds of hitting spirit. If necessary, also use an Omen of Sinistral Necromancy to guarantee that you desecrate a prefix instead of a suffix. It's not a guarantee you'll hit, but if the staff is cheap enough without spirit, it might be worth the gamble. After swapping to a staff, make sure to adjust your reservation skills so that all of them are active on weapon set 1, and only Mana Remnants is disabled on weapon set 2. Whenever you hit level 90, buy a 2020 Flameblast gem. Maybe even a 2120 if you can afford it at that point. Also grab a 2020 Frostflame Nova and a 2020 Incinerate. Make sure that if you buy one of these gems corrupted, it already has 5 gem sockets. You'll want all of these gems at level 21 at some point, but you can decide when you want to go for them according to your needs. Depending on prices, it may make sense to corrupt the gems yourself. Defensively, the best upgrade to chase at this stage is a helmet with really high armor. Socket Emergent Vigor and allocate Runic Helm for a good boost of HP. If you're playing hardcore, you may choose to do this upgrade earlier in the progression. Now we're getting into luxury upgrade territory, possibly dozens of divines for items that are maybe a 15 to 20% power boost. Offensively, the most impactful upgrades will be to your staff and amulet. For the staff, you still want the same mods, but you want them at higher tiers. That means either +6 to level of all spell skills, or +7 to level of all fire spell skills in the suffixes. In the prefixes, you want Spirit, a tier 1 spell damage mod, and a high tier of either flat mana, or hybrid mana and spell damage. For the remaining 2 suffixes, you want a mid to high tier of cast speed, and one of mana regen, flammability magnitude, or intelligence. Your amulet will have +3 or even +4 to all spell skills, along with Spirit, max life, max mana, all attributes, and either cast speed or a resistance mod. All of these at mid to high tiers will be expensive, but worth it eventually for this build. You want all of your rares to have 5 or 6 really good mods. Your total armor, max life, and max mana should be close to what I have. Resistances should be capped, including chaos if possible. If resists are good and you have free suffixes, go for things like cast speed and curse magnitude on rings. If you can find good rings with damage taken from mana before life on them, you can replace the Great Wolf's Rune of Willpower in your Loreweave with a Kraken's Rune of Warding for curse reduction. This is also the point where we start wanting our most important gems to be level 21. That means Flameblast, Frostflame Nova, and Incinerate. For Flameblast specifically, we want that to be twice corrupted with level 21 and 23% quality. Depending on market prices, you'll need to decide whether you'd rather buy the 21-23 gem outright, or try to gamble for one yourself. Every additional level of Flameblast is roughly 16% more damage than the previous level, while the extra 3% quality is only a 6% damage boost, so feel free to hold off on the 21-23 for a bit if you prefer. If you've got a good Loreweave, meaning it has a third ring modifier that you're happy to keep forever, then now is a good time to use Divine Orbs on the Loreweave. We want 80% max resistances and plus 5% to quality of skills. This will take 24 divines on average to hit, so be prepared to set some money on fire. Other things I'd be acquiring at this point include a Prism of Belief with plus 3 to level of Flameblast, the tool's Stillness support gem for more freeze buildup, Varana's Siege for more Flameblast AoE, and possibly Zoph's Pyre as well. When adding Tool Stillness to the build, make sure that the runes in Taryn's Shiver are now 1 Finimus' Rune of Agony and 1 Perfect Iron Rune. If you've got a nice pair of gloves that you'd be happy to wear forever, then consider the Cadigan's Epiphany Rune, which adds a jewel socket to your gloves. You would then have 5 total jewel sockets. You can then use 4 unique jewels and 1 rare jewel. If you haven't picked up a Megalomaniac jewel yet, shop around for a good one. To craft a good rare jewel for this build, buy one with good rolls on Ignite Magnitude and Magnitude of Ailments. Then use a potent liquid ferocity on it, hoping it replaces a suffix with increased effect of prefixes. If you want to min-max your curses, get a 21-23 Blasphemy, as well as 21-20 or even 21-23 copies of each of your curses. You may also want a Rite of Passage charm. I've opted for one with Spirit of the Bear, because I like the extra defense while clearing. If you've done everything I've said so far, you've taken the build as far as I have, and possibly as far as I ever will. However, there are still some more exotic upgrades you could make if you have hundreds of divines and want to push this further. The ideal weapon for this build might not be a staff at all, but instead the unique wand Runeseeker's Call. This wand has 5 rune sockets and triples the effect of every socketed rune. The ideal rune-mastered version of this item is the one granting increased mana regen. If you're extra rich, buy one that's corrupted with a 6th socket. In the wand, you'll want to socket Legacy of Lifesprig, Hedgewitch Assandra's Rune of Wisdom, Fenimus' Rune of Agony, and 2 Perfect Iron Runes. This gives a total of plus 9 to level of all spell skills, 210% increased spell damage, and 39% of damage gained as extra chaos. You'd lose some cast speed and spirit, but you can make up the cast speed difference with suffixes on jewelry. As for the spirit loss, you actually gain spirit overall, because using a wand means you can use a scepter in the offhand. The ideal scepter would have increased spirit, added max mana, and aura magnitude. The aura magnitude comes from a perfect essence of command, and works with our curses because they count as auras with blasphemy. The best options for the remaining 2 suffixes are mana regen and either intelligence or strength. In the socket, use the warding rune of Equinox. Because you can get so much spirit from your scepter in this setup, you no longer need spirit on both the amulet and the belt. Consequently, you could just drop Darkness Enthroned from Mageblood. I think my preferred Mageblood for this build would be Granite, Quicksilver, Sulfur, and 1 duplicate, but you do you. Swapping to Mageblood comes with 2 downsides. First, you lose 9% quality on all skills, which causes the Flameblast gem to do 17% less damage, makes you lose some armor from Arctic Armor, and makes your curses a bit weaker. You can compensate for those losses with Mageblood's buffs, but now for the second downside. Although this transition doesn't lose you any spirit on weapon set 1, you do lose that spirit on weapon set 2. You're now at a point where the only spirit available on weapon set 2 is the 100 spirit from the campaign plus whatever is on your amulet. That's probably enough for blasphemy and nothing else. Mana Remnants isn't needed on weapon set 2 anyway, but losing both Overwhelming Presence and Arctic Armor when you use Frostflame Nova is unfortunate. Overwhelming Presence is huge for freeze buildup, and all Arctic Armor stages are lost when the skill is deactivated. I've been trying to come up with different ways to deal with this potential issue. One way would be to just deal with the jank of losing Overwhelming Presence and Arctic Armor when swapping to Taryn's Shiver. I don't like this option very much. Another option is to skip Mageblood, keep the Darkness Enthroned, and use the extra spirit from the Scepter to socket a bunch of support gems that have additional spirit reservations, such as Cannibalism and Vitality. However, this feels intuitively wrong. Surely an item like Mageblood is worth moving heaven and earth to fit in, right? Let's consider some ways we could gain some extra spirit for the build. One way is to drop Despair from the Blasphemy setup, replace it with Slow Potency, and manually cast Despair on bosses instead. This means you'd lose some damage while clearing, but that might not matter at all. Plus, the curse would be stronger when manually cast, because it wouldn't have its magnitude lowered by Blasphemy. This change requires getting another skill slot, or dropping an existing skill, such as Refutation. But it frees up about 50 spirit, which single-handedly compensates for the loss of spirit from Darkness Enthroned. There's another solution that's essentially just throwing money at the problem. You could get a helmet that's corrupted with 20 to 30 additional spirit. That will be difficult to acquire without losing too much on the helmet's explicit mods, but it's a simple plug-and-play upgrade, theoretically. You could then free up another 15 spirit by socketing Diala's Desire into the Blasphemy setup. It would lose a small amount of AoE, but gain extra curse magnitudes and a 90% reservation multiplier. The combination of a well-rolled helmet corruption and the support gem should compensate for Darkness Enthroned. Another option for dealing with the spirit issue is simply dropping Taryn's Shiver from the build and replacing it with either a staff with spirit or a wand and scepter. Frostflame Nova would get additional gem levels and actually freeze more easily than before, but it would no longer cause enemies to take 100% increased damage while frozen. You could either decide it's okay to lose that damage because Flameblast does enough damage anyway, or you could try to compensate by applying Withered to bosses. Withering Presence and Dark Effigy seem like the best avenues for this, but I'm not experienced enough with Chaos builds to know for sure. Lastly, you could drop Frostflame Nova entirely and figure out something else to do with Weapon Set 2. However, at this point we're deviating from what I consider a core component of my build, so I won't pursue that line of thought any further. It is worth noting that by switching to Runeseeker's Call and getting 39% of damage as extra Chaos damage, that lowers the value of Zoth's Pyre relative to other support gems. It was already kind of a side grade compared to Considered Casting because it had roughly the same damage but without the cast speed penalty. With Runeseeker's Call, I'd say Zoth's Pyre is more of a downgrade now and should be replaced with Considered Casting. One perk of dropping Zoth's Pyre from Flameblast is that it can be instead used on Incinerate in place of Chaos Attunement. If you aren't using Diala's Desire in your Curse setup, consider using it on Flameblast instead. It's roughly 29% more damage if using the Mageblood setup, which makes it competitive with Considered Casting and strictly better than Zoth's Pyre. Other possible Giga-endgame upgrades include buying a Megalomaniac with 3 good notables, corrupting gear for extra augment sockets, and using voices for extra jewel sockets. I think the best item to corrupt an additional socket onto would be the helmet, so that you can socket a Raven-touched shard and instill the helmet with a notable passive. If you were to get a Kaum's Blessing enchantment, you could use a Warcry to ancestrally boost your Flameblast and make it do 30% more damage. This would require an additional skill slot and an additional button press, but that's a lot more damage. You could certainly argue that the last thing this build needs is single target damage, but we're well past the point of practicality here. You're already killing bosses multiple times over, so this is more about number go up than anything. Speaking of number go up, it may even be possible to scale crit with this build. Flameblast has a relatively low base crit chance of 8%, but there's an otherworldly suffix on amulets that grants between plus 4% and plus 5% to fire spell critical hit chance. If an amulet with this modifier could somehow be crafted into a legitimate endgame item, then with quality it could raise Flameblast's crit chance to 14% or even 15%. Combine that with Legacy of Diamond on a Mageblood, a perfect vision rune in Runeseeker's Call, and some other adjustments to items and passives, and we could be looking at some real crit numbers. Here are some general tips for piloting the build. Firstly, don't forget about Reputation. It's one of the best active defenses in the game, and you should get in the habit of using it when there are many enemies around, or when you want to make sure you don't get stunned out of channeling Flameblast. Speaking of channeling Flameblast, most of the time you don't need to fully channel it. As you could probably tell from my footage, I like fully charging it, even when I don't need to. However, objectively, even 1 or 2 stages of Flameblast is often enough damage to clear screens with Contagion. For faster gameplay, try to get in the habit of only partially channeling the skill. Remember to disable Gloom Shrines when you click on them. If you ever notice that you're not leaving any burning corpses, it's probably because you're affected by a Gloom Shrine buff. Flameblast's cooldown is long, and you probably don't have the mana regen to channel it for very long. For bosses that have periods of invulnerability, make sure you fully wait them out before releasing Flameblast, or else you'll be awkwardly running around for 8 seconds or so while you wait for the cooldown. Generally speaking, if you don't see your curses applying to the boss, they're probably not damageable. Wait until you see the curses apply, and then feel free to deal damage. I should also talk about rolling maps in the endgame. Remember that this build is immune to crits through the Ascendancy, and immune to having its max resists lowered thanks to Loreweave. If you see the crit mod or the minus max resist mod appear, it's a free mod. There's no Waystone modifier that this build can't run, but there are some that I definitely don't like seeing. Less effective curses is definitely one of the bad ones. Enemies have noticeably higher speed and damage in maps with this Waystone mod. Another bad one is less cooldown recovery rate, because it makes Flameblast's cooldown longer. Again, it's not a brick, but it feels pretty bad. Increased ailment threshold isn't so bad for me at this point, but earlier in the progression it definitely makes enemies harder to freeze and can even make Flameblast fail to ignite bosses on rare occasions. Monsters penetrate elemental resistances is probably the most dangerous map mod for many builds, and that's especially true for this one because its max resists are 80% instead of 75%. Since sharing this build on Reddit a few days ago, I've had a lot of great discussions with other users, many of whom have since rerolled into this build or previously attempted a similar build. I want to especially thank user Rat Seesaw for pointing out the interaction between Rune of the Blossom and Darkness Enthroned, which allowed me to fit in Arctic Armor and Overwhelming Presence. I'd also like to thank user Fadyboy, who has pushed this build to Runeseeker Mageblood levels and shared their insights with me. Everyone who asked questions or offered their feedback helped me take this build and guide to the next level. That's about it. This is my first time trying to be this thorough in a build video, so I hope it's been helpful. If I've missed anything, and I'm sure I have, feel free to ask for clarification in the comments. Thanks for watching.